Hey, what's up? This is Alabaster Lord here. We seem to care a lot about looking wealthy. All across the internet there are guides and tips to make your outfit look expensive on a budget, or cover up the fact that you're wearing affordable clothing. As if nothing could be worse than appearing poor or working class. But is that really true? At the same time, the aesthetics of the working class are consistently portrayed as cool and authentic, and luxury clothing brands are keen to incorporate those aesthetics into their high-priced clothing. Something strange is going on here. Does fashion have an obsession with class tourism? Is there anything wrong with dressing rich or dressing poor? And can understanding clothing as a kind of spectacle help us to dress in a more interesting way? We'll be looking at those questions and more as we dive into this topic of the aesthetics of the working class and wealth. Something feels inherently wrong with the wealthy wearing the uniform of the working class. It's almost insulting to take something worn by necessity, clothing with rips in, hand-me-downs from older siblings which don't fit, dirty clothes, garments which prioritize function over form, and saying this isn't for poor people anymore, this is now a cool thing which rich people can wear. I saw a great video recently by Alice Capel which in turn references some TikTok content highlighting this sort of poverty play, people adopting the aesthetic of the working class when their actual lifestyle is more akin to middle or upper class. You might have seen people doing this both on social media and in the real world, that guy who's always claiming to be broke but then always seems to have money to do expensive stuff. This isn't a new phenomenon either. Multiple people wrote about the rise of the new lad in the mid-2010s, stealthily middle-class Brits wearing a mix of more expensive streetwear clothing, with strongly working class associated labels thrown in there too, as if to ride off their authenticity, but still present themselves as a cool fashion fan. Stone Island to a Brit is really the perfect brand, which has those clear links to football hooligan culture, but at the same time is expensive and fashion forward enough that it still appeals to those working class cosplayers. As a British person that likes Stone Island as a brand but isn't really into the football or terrace culture, this is something that I have to wrestle with. It's partly why I gravitate towards Shadow Project and those lesser branded items, but it's interesting that this brand doesn't really have those same associations over in the US. Even 20 years ago, Guardian fashion writer Zoe Williams describes a fashion photographer's apparent fascination with a homeless person's life in London, describing it as noble and aspirational to live outside society in that way. She concludes by describing the poor as cooler than us, with us presumably being the middle-class Guardian reader, and of the poor being inherently pious. Interestingly, she also writes that today there is no higher purpose than spending, i.e. our ultimate goal is to spend money acquiring stuff, but jokes that spending money to chase this inherent coolness of not having money is an oxymoron. But is it? Can we spend our way to achieving this apparently cool working class aesthetic? Luxury fashion brands would certainly like you to think so. How often are looks associated with the working class repurposed or repositioned as high-price luxury items? We could pick out loads of individual examples of this in recent years. You can probably think of more than what I'm showing here, but this has happened subtly at an industry-wide level too. Streetwear is an enormously popular aesthetic with a total market value of $173 billion in 2021, and a historically working class aesthetic born from the rise of rap and hip hop culture in the 1980s. But it's absolutely seen luxury fashion brands integrate into that aesthetic and begin producing clothing that's more aligned to streetwear. That's particularly true of more disruptive brands like Balenciaga and Vetements. This is clothing designed to be worn in the urban environment, not a fancy dinner party. Of course, they're presented in appropriately gritty or down-to-earth ways, but even more conservative houses like Dior and Louis Vuitton have created more and more clothing in recent years which has something of that streetwear aesthetic. Collaborations played a big part in allowing luxury brands to transition into products with streetwear appeal, and empowering wealthy people to dress in a way that incorporates working class aesthetics without being accused of class tourism. Supreme and Louis Vuitton are the ultimate bridge between these two cultures, but more recently Dior Jordans, Gucci Palace, Balenciaga and Adidas, Tiffany and Nike all take streetwear or working class aesthetics and brands and elevate them. They turn an available product into a more aspirational one, and simultaneously make it more palatable to a wealthy person now that it effectively has a high fashion stamp of approval. The appointment of designers with street fashion history to luxury fashion houses is of course only the next stage here. We had Virgil for Louis Vuitton, more recently Pharrell. Nigo was appointed the creative director of Kenzo, Matthew Williams with Dior. Luxury brands clearly want that spark which makes their creative output appeal to streetwear consumers and to the streetwear aesthetic. And for what it's worth, I don't think these are bad ideas at all. The upcoming Kid Super and Louis Vuitton stuff I think looks really great. And Nigo is doing a good job re-energizing Kenzo with these fun, youthful designs that still play off the brand's history. The existence of this stuff is pretty clear, and there are plenty of options for people who want to express themselves in working class aesthetics regardless of their income. But why are working class aesthetics perceived as cool and desirable in the first place? Luxury or expensive products have become more available and easier to purchase than ever. Last year, even with high inflation and market uncertainty, a Vogue business survey revealed over half of fashion shoppers were switching to more expensive brands, and 3/4 of Gen Z and millennial buyers increased or maintained their luxury budget. Some of the most purchased brands were those mid-tier ones like Coach and Michael Kors, which are symbols of wealth but available more affordably than what I'd consider to be those true luxury brands like Dior and Louis Vuitton. So many people can buy something with a luxury logo on to communicate their social standing. And when something that communicates, "This cost money, I am very wealthy," is so easy to come across, that becomes less valuable. People look to other currencies like authenticity, cultural connection, hard work even. The idea of the clothing we wear and the goods we consume being prescribed value which has nothing to do with their utility or their production cost is something postmodern writers like Guy Debord discuss. Society of the Spectacle describes the commodity form, items consumed and traded in society which are given supernatural or religious values, and those values being more important than the physical reality of the item. Rocking a technical jacket, for example, says a lot about what kind of hobbies you're into, how interested in fashion you are, maybe how much money you have as well. None of those things need to be true, of course, but the commodity does the talking for you. So it is with the Carhartt double knees and worn vintage hoodies. We let those items tell the story of who the wearer is and what they stand for. And I think a lot of people perceive that story to be more interesting than how much money is in the wearer's bank account. In the Society of the Spectacle, faking it is making it, and adopting the aesthetics of the working class does a great job of communicating solidarity and connection with that social class, even if it's not true. That's especially important when contempt for billionaires and the ultra-rich is understandably at an all-time high. I mean, it's not a good look. That Alice Capel video I referenced made a really good additional point about working class culture being glamorized when it works, and I think that applies quite nicely to fashion too. Right now, workwear, utilitarian clothing, worn-in, archival vintage stuff is really popular. It's clothing representative of working class people fulfilling their societal role. There's a certain appeal of people doing stuff and not being afraid to get their hands dirty. I think people like that idea and want to buy into it. Again, because that is a lot more interesting than pure displays of wealth. It's ironic that it's never been easier to own a symbol of wealth, and at the same time the extremely wealthy are desperate to make people feel he's just like me for real, and play down the vast amount of resources they have access to. There is of course a much simpler and less cynical answer for why people might want to adopt these kinds of aesthetics regardless of their actual financial background. Fashion is about self-expression. Some people maybe just feel a closer connection to working class aesthetics than they do to traditional wealthy ones. Maybe these people want to show that they're comfortable with who they are, they don't feel a need to communicate wealth or status, and maybe they just personally take value in things which have been worn and well loved. I'd like to think that even if I won the lottery, I'm not going to start wandering around in a full head-to-toe Gucci tracksuit, because it's just not really me. Actually, maybe I would do that, but like one time and then I'm done. With that said, I think we've identified some potential reasons why working class aesthetics might appeal to middle or upper class people. The question is though, is that a problem? There has been criticism for wealthier people buying up workwear or utilitarian clothing, then driving up the price for people who either need it or have been authentically wearing it their whole lives, or raiding thrift stores to resell archive or Y2K clothing at large markups, then reducing the availability for people who have traditionally relied on those more affordable sources of clothing. And for some, the working class aesthetic goes beyond wearing clothing that they like and into adopting an entire fake persona.
Why is Palace well in Spring?
It's more road. It's better, and it's better for bunning.
Talking and behaving like someone they're not, acting like a working class Londoner and then running back to mummy and daddy's estate in Sussex for Christmas is extremely cringe. A potential bigger issue, or at least something to be aware of, is the power imbalance here, where the rich are really the ones who are getting to decide which elements of working class culture or aesthetics are perceived to be cool or worthy of adoption. The people creating or driving that culture get no such luxury. I've seen people in comments justifiably pretty annoyed that the clothing they used to get bullied for, the only clothing that they had access to, is now considered to be the height of coolness. As if it can only be properly appreciated once middle and upper class people start wearing it. I'm very much of the opinion that everything deserves to be judged on its own merit. We definitely don't need to wait for wealthy or influential or famous people to wear it and tell us that it's cool first. If you like it, if it speaks to you, there's nothing wrong with incorporating it, and you might find yourself dressing cooler that way. The positive side to this, at least, is that the popularity of working class and utilitarian clothing could lead to people at a wider level gaining an appreciation or an understanding of it, when in the past they might have ignored it in favour of an obsession with looking expensive. Maybe it can be done effectively and with sensitivity, not just by individuals but with luxury fashion brands too. I think some of those collaborations I mentioned earlier are effective at bringing different ideas or aesthetics together and showing their individual value. Most designers are not out there to create clothing as a pastiche or a joke at the expense of the working class. Instead, they're looking at references which mean something to them or have some kind of significance. Take the Balenciaga FW22 show, overtly referencing Ukrainian refugees, not to turn their suffering into a marketing moment, but for Demna to draw attention to their importance and tragedy of that situation, whilst referencing his own experiences as a migrant fleeing war in Georgia as a child. Despite everything we've talked about and how pervasive the working class aesthetic seems to be, there is still a massive genre of helping people to look expensive. From tutorials on how to make your outfit look like it costs more to guides on dressing old money, i.e. having an enormous amount of generational wealth to the point you can live a life of luxury. This is another piece of the puzzle we definitely need to address. Displaying wealth through your clothing is, of course, still a pretty big deal. Luxury fashion brands owe their success and profitability at least partly to this, and why else would I zip two Arc'teryx jackets together if not for the double flex? Luckily, if you don't want to drop racks on an expensive jacket, looking expensive on a budget is an entire genre of fashion content. With tips ranging from wearing tonal outfits, smarter trousers and collared shirts, to swapping your sneakers for Chelsea boots. Many of these tips are not inherently bad, as to me they just reference a different style of dress. Often they link looking more expensive to just dressing a bit smarter. Wow, a shirt, get a load of Mr. Moneybags over there. Maybe they empower people to expand their style by considering smarter looks instead of just what's on trend at the moment. That's great, I don't really wear it myself, but I definitely have some appreciation for these classic menswear looks. I do think looking expensive conceptually is bad advice though. And let me be clear, I want people to look and feel $1,000,000 every time. However much you spend on clothing, you deserve to be happy with how you look and express yourself in a way that you like. A lot of my recent content has been critical of those systems which make people unsatisfied with their clothing and feel like they constantly need to buy more. But you've probably seen outfits which cost a bomb and look terrible, and you certainly don't need me to tell you that money doesn't buy style. Therefore, your fit looking expensive has nothing to do with it looking good, so why would you want to spend your energy trying to look expensive when you could be spending that energy trying to look good? If an outfit ends up looking, or is, expensive, That's fine, that's not a problem, but I feel like it should only ever be a consequence of how you want to present yourself, not the active goal. I also take issue with all of these people presenting tips on looking more expensive because the implication is that looking expensive is good and something that you want to achieve, and therefore that not looking expensive is bad. Even forgetting this feels somewhere between elitist and posturing for the wealthy, don't we have enough criteria for drip or looking cool in this hyper-reality fashion hellscape we find ourselves in? Do we really need to have this other criteria of looking expensive too? The final irony, of course, as we've explored in this video, is that expensive luxury clothing is frequently borrowing from the aesthetics of the working class. Plenty of wealthy people are not preoccupied with looking expensive. If they don't care about looking wealthy, should we? In an ideal world, I feel like aesthetics and wealth should be entirely divorced from each other. Whether someone wants to present as a workwear fan or as old money, the only criteria for judgment should be how effectively and how authentically they are representing and self-expressing in those ways. How much money it costs or how wealthy the wearer is shouldn't really factor into it. I also think we should be critical of working class appropriation or class tourism or turning that sort of thing into a joke, but we should be careful about concluding that rich people have to dress rich. Logically then, all classes should be forced into the uniform of that class, which is kind of an unpleasant thought. I feel like it's healthier for people to feel more free and more empowered with the way that they want to dress, and that does have to work both ways. I also realise that perhaps some of this discourse that dressing expensive doesn't matter rings a little bit hollow from someone like me who, as a consequence of making fashion YouTube videos for like 7 years, has far more expensive clothing than they actually need. This here is not normal, and if I wasn't making fashion YouTube videos, my office would not be full of jackets. I totally understand, as I referenced earlier, there is a lot of content out there which makes people feel under pressure to consume more and spend more money buying more fashion stuff. But I also think we're at a time that a lot of people genuinely value outfits outside of their monetary value, where creativity and authenticity and even making stuff yourself is considered to be really cool. That, I think, is definitely something worth remembering. That brings me to the end of my thoughts here. I appreciate this is a super complex and nuanced topic, and there are all kinds of tangents in all kinds of different places that I simply wasn't able to cover. So I'm really hoping that something that I've said here has just sparked something off in your brain and something extra that you would like to add to this piece of the conversation. So please do feel free to do that. That is what the comment section is for, and I'm certainly looking forward to reading some of your thoughts and furthering this discussion topic. Definitely enjoying thinking through these more complex topics though. I've got some more ideas for some fun stuff on the way, so keep an eye out for future videos. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and of course if you enjoyed the video, would massively appreciate a like there. Believe it or not, it does massively help me out, and it makes me feel good and special, and it makes me want to do more cool videos. So with that in mind, I'll see you soon in the next one.